Welcome back. Looks like we got the chat fixed. Thank you to all of you who are working behind the scenes. And it is my pleasure to introduce Laurie Hernandez, WDE Director of Standards and Assessments. I'm going to ask that if parents and audience members, if you could wait until the end of her session and then post your questions, we will help facilitate that and get as many as we can answered. The floor is all yours, Laurie.
Thanks so much, Kim, and good morning, everybody. It's so good to see you all here with us today. My session is going to be Standards and Assessment 101. So let me get that projected. And while I am setting that up, as Kim said, please hold your questions because the way I've got my slides, I may be coming to answer those along the way. So I'm trying to take you on the journey of full understanding from the big picture and then down into the parts. Could I get a confirmation that my slideshow is showing correctly for everybody? Kim, are we good?
Yes, Laurie, it all looks good from our end. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. So as I said, we're going to start out with the big picture. And as we look at the education system in Wyoming, what feeds into that, what builds into that, what is the design in statute for that? So first, we have our state standards. Those are defining what should be taught to students across the state. And throughout our statute, there is mention about making sure that our education program is equitable and uniform so that all students are getting the same opportunities despite or in lieu of where they may be coming from or going to, or even transitioning across the state. With the state standards, that what is created at the state level with educators, parents, community members, and approved by the board, feeds then into what curriculum and instruction and resources districts choose to use to teach those standards. So the how it's implemented, how it's taught, those are local decisions made by your local school boards and your districts and teachers. And then to monitor and assess these things throughout time, we have district and state assessments. So the districts have a district assessment system and the state has a statewide assessment system, which includes our YTOP and our YALT assessments. And those are designed to assess students learning on those state standards. So those give us the data points to say, are we, in fact, teaching those state standards to the students and how well are they demonstrating their understanding and mastery of them? And then those results from the state assessment feed into the accountability measures for both our federal and our state accountability. And those then determine school performance ratings. So schools get a rating based on many different indicators that feed together, not just a single data point. Altogether, these things feed into understanding how our schools are doing, how well our students are learning, and how well our schools are teaching. And then as needed, schools that are identified as struggling will receive additional assistance to help increase student and school performance. So through those targeted supports, that can include statewide professional development, district accreditation support, school improvement planning and monitoring, as well as additional on-site technical assistance and support. So statutory requirements for learning have been commonly referred to as the basket of goods. And in that, you won't find the word basket of goods in statute, but you'll hear the legislature talk about it when they are discussing the Common Core of knowledge and skills. And that is what is found in statute. So we have the Common Core of knowledge, which includes several of the content areas and humanities, and it's basically what are the things or the topics our students are expected to learn. And then the Common Core of skills include things like problem solving and interpersonal communications, computational thinking and computer applications, critical thinking, creativity, and then also life skills, including personal finance. So with those things all together, we embed that into the state standards which are defining what students should know and be able to do, and then the districts decide how to include that in their district curriculum and instruction. There is also statutory requirement that we have focus areas in the curriculum emphasizing reading, writing, and math in grades 1 through 8, and also required to make sure that all students, even on IEPs and 504 plans, have been provided the opportunity to learn the Common Core prescribed in the standards. And so they are given additional supports as needed to be able to fully reach their demonstration of those standards. Altogether, it is to provide an equitable education opportunity for all students across the state. So within that Common Core of knowledge, we have these 10 content standards that are approved by the State Board of Education. We have English Language Arts, also heard or known as ELA. We have math, science, and social studies. And then we have additionally PE, health and safety, fine and performing arts, world languages and cultures, career and technical education, also known as CTE, and computer science, which was added in 2018. The standards are what are defining what students should know and be able to do. They are given some very specific language to give the direct verbiage that students are expected to demonstrate at. And one thing to note when we're looking at standards, a standard does not equal a standard across all grades, across all content areas. They don't have the same weighting in the time it might take to master that standard. It might, there might be some foundational standards that build up to a culminating standard. There may be some skills that need to be first learned before students can master a standard. So it's really important to know that they don't have equal weighting. And as you progress across the grades and as you go through different content areas, you'll see different approaches. But one thing you'll see common in all of our state standards is that it is a very clear what's the action intended to be done or demonstrated. So for example, it may say demonstrate or identify or explain. And those are very different levels of expectation. So if I'm asked to identify something, maybe I'm picking something out of a group. And so I have to understand that which one belongs or which one does not. If I'm asked to demonstrate something, I'm usually having to perform a task. And if I'm asked to explain something, that's taking it to a further level of showing that I fully understand it enough to explain it. And so it is important to look for those words as you're going through these standards with looking at what your student is learning for the year and understanding the depth and degree of that. With the schools and districts deciding what the curriculum and instruction is used, that's going to determine how those standards are implemented, how they're taught, and what instructional materials are being used. And so you might have a variety of things that are being utilized in the classroom or in the school itself. So that's a great place to start a conversation with your schools and teachers of, what they are doing, what they are using, how there might be additional resources to help support your student at home if you want to take extra time and help them at home. But how do these standards come to be? Who does what? How do we develop them? Well, there's a standards review committee that is pulled together from across the state. This includes educators, everything from pre-kindergarten all the way through higher ed level, college level, as well as parents, business, and community members. And they come together, a group of about 40 people that have representation geographically across the state by role, making sure that our small and our large districts are represented, and our various community members and even business and industry as it might relate to that content area are brought in onto this committee to then create the standards. And then once those standards are created by that 40 member community committee, then they go to the State Board of Education, who then approves those standards after multiple rounds of public input. So I'm going to, on the next slide, explain all those input periods so that you understand as parents and public where you can play into that role. The standards are not something that happen quickly. The development of those usually can take 9 to 18 months to create the standards and go through the input sessions, and then another 4 to 6 months to go through the promulgation of those rules. So there are 4 different phases, and in 3 of those phases, we have public input. So on the initial input, before that committee even convenes, we ask the public to describe, what do you want the committee to know as they start their work? What is important for students to learn in this content area? And then after the committee is convened and drafted the standards, the state board triggers an informal input, and they ask the public to look at those draft standards and to give input for their consideration. And so those input are then given to the State Board of Education. They look at the draft standards along with the input, and then they decide if it goes to the next phase or if it goes back to the committee for some addressing of that input. If it proceeds on to the final phase, then we go into the rules promulgation piece. And in that, Chapter 10 rules is designated to the state standards. And as that promulgation process happens, another public input period is held. And each of those public input periods are 45 days minimum. After the standards are adopted, then the districts have typically 3 years to implement them. So again, nothing goes really fast because it takes time to then make any changes on the resources you're going to use, to map out your curriculum and design your lesson plans and develop your assessments to measure student progress on those standards. So districts have 3 years to get that all stood up, to design that curriculum, instruction, and assessment system. They do need to make sure that those are aligned to the state standards, and then those are what are going to feed into our state assessment as well. In the state assessment, the standards are assessed to, by statute, measure individual student performance and progress. And the data that comes from those assessments is used to enhance district and school level teaching and learning, to support school improvement efforts, and to provide data for accountability, making sure that we have effectiveness of our schools and our programs and our staff across the state. So all of that and that state data is designed to ensure and give us a snapshot of how well our schools are doing, how well our students are learning, and making sure that those systems are put in place to equitably provide an education program for all of our Wyoming students that is rigorous and high quality. With the state assessments, which is not just YTOP, but does include YTOP, which 99% of our students take. Per statute here, those summative assessments, YTOP and YAL, must be fair and unbiased. And to ensure that, we have additional educator committees convened to review assessment items to make sure they are free of any bias or any kind of issue. We take a lot of effort to make sure that items that are on a test for a student that may be visually impaired are at a level that they can attend to that task, and that they can do what is being asked of them, and that they're not limited by their visual impairment. We also have a committee that looks to see if in those items, is it unfair to ask a kid to do something they may not have any kind of understanding of. And so, in Hawaii, they might have a lot of items around volcanoes because that's in their backyard, but Wyoming, it's not. And so where it relates to the science standards, it may be there, but if it's something that maybe it would be an unfair advantage for a group of kids, that committee reviews that, analyzes it, and discusses it to determine if it lives on or not for our Wyoming bank. We also have to ensure that our assessment results are valid from year to year so that we can have comparisons and so that we can look at previous year's data and see what the picture is of what's happening in our Wyoming education program. We also are expected to include optional interim assessments, and those are designed as mini summative versions of that final state summative test so that students have opportunity to see what those items look like, to practice on the platform with the tools, and to get some results for educators to give some determination about how well and how prepared students are for that state summative test at the end of the year. Also expected to make sure that those results are reliable and transparent. So with reliable, we want to make sure that if the same test was replicated multiple times, it has a similar measure of that student's performance. And transparent, meaning that we are providing as immediate as possible results and that districts and parents have access to those. Also in statute, it is expected that our state tests take less than 1% of the time students are in learning. So for this, in elementary, that's approximately 9 hours. In junior high, middle school, that's 10 hours. And in high school, that's approximately 11 hours. And we do monitor the testing time throughout the year each year to make sure that we are staying within that statutory requirement. And we have had our YTOP results or our YTOP test take approximately 0.6% of students' learning time. So we are well below that 1% max. There are 5 assessments in Wyoming plus a national assessment. So I want to make sure everybody knows all of those options. Our YTOP assessment is our general assessment that is assessing the students on the 3 content areas of English language arts, math, and science. Approximately 99% of all of our students take the YTOP test in grades 3 through 10. In ELA and math, it is each of those grades 3 through 10. Writing, it's in grades 5, 7, and 9. And in science, it's in grades 4, 8, and 10. Our YALT assessment is a mirror of our YTOP for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So it is based on the extended standards. So another educator committee convenes to create extended standards for those 3 content areas that help to extend that learning to the various levels of ability for some of our students that may have the most significant cognitive disabilities. It mirrors it in the same grades for ELA and math, 3 through 10, and science for 8 and 10. We also have our English language proficiency assessment, which is our access test or our alt access test. And this assesses our students that are English learners on their progress in English language proficiency. We have our WIDA assessment that uses the WIDA standards, and those are also aligned to our state standards. In our high school assessments, ACT is our college readiness exam. The state does pay for every junior to take that test in grade 11, and then also to provide a fall senior retake for students who want to try to improve their score and to add their opportunities for Hathaway Scholarship possibilities there. Our Work Keys exam is also a career readiness exam that is also provided by ACT. This is optional to our students, but the state does pay for every student to have that opportunity to take the Work Keys exam anytime in their 11th or 12th grade years. This is where students can earn their National Career Readiness certificates, and it's a great opportunity, and it's also built into our accountability system, so students and schools can benefit from that exam as well. Our national assessment is called NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Excellence in I just blanked out on that one. Pardon me 1 second. That is not correct, but it is our national assessment, which is also known as the nation's report card. This is where all the states in the United States, as well as the territories, have a participation in, but not full participation. It's a sampling of students and schools that participate in this. And it's the one assessment that can give a true measure across the United States about how our education programs are doing as a group across the states. With that, we have our students in 4th and 8th grade take a reading and math test. And again, it's a sampling, so not every student. So your student may not have taken it in our most recent edition in January of this year, and they may have taken it back in 2024, and they might not have taken it ever. And so that sampling just gives us a snapshot of how well our state is doing in comparison to other states. And typically we do really well. Our state has been up in the top 5 named in several of those categories for a few years. When we're building our state assessments, it's really, you don't need to read all of this, but it's really important to know that it's not a simple task either. So just like our state standards take 1 to 2 years to develop, our state assessment takes 2 to 3 years to develop. So where you see the gray, that is the assessment vendor touch points. So they start out by creating items to assess our state standards in the grade levels that we have designated. And then the blue show touch points for the WD. So my staff and I go through and review the work of the vendor, look and see that there's alignment to those state standards, ensure that the content is age appropriate and that it is appropriate for Wyoming. And then where you see those gold boxes, those are educator touch points. So our Wyoming educators come in and do work with us to look at this assessment item to determine, is it fair and unbiased? Is it age appropriate? Is it aligned to the state standards? And is it well developed to fully assess what we're trying to understand if students know and can do? And so that first touch point is that done on the front end before we ever even field test an item. And then when we field test an item, it does not impact a student's results. The main intent of it is to collect some data, and then an educator committee comes back together to look at that data. And if there's anything flagged in the data, they'll specifically look at the content because they are content experts. And they'll look at that assessment item to see if there's any issue with how the item was written, with how the answer options were provided. Was there any confusion that maybe directed a group of students to select a different answer than the correct answer? Was there a way it was written that maybe didn't completely explain what the intent of the action to do was? There's a lot of things that go into looking at that to see if that item lives on in our item pool, or if it ended up not being a good item, it can be rewritten or it can be put in the trash can. And then after all of the items are reviewed, another thing to note, the assessment vendor doesn't just mark what percent of kids got the item right. They do some extra math work in there called psychometrics. And it is looking at how well students are performing on the test, as well as the individual items. So we get some additional data points that tell us kids that are doing well on the test as a whole, how are they doing on this item? And so is it on par with how they're performing across the test, or is it lower than what they were doing on the rest of the test? Is it unexpected, or is it on track with what would be expected? And so that feeds in additional information for that review committee, as well as my department, to look at and see what might be at play here. Is there any issue? and those make determinations on whether or not the items go into the operational bank to then be used for student scores and for school performance reports. So how does this all connect again? Trying to make sure we remember, what we've been talking through here. So that standards review process in the top right-hand corner, that takes 1 to 2 years to develop through committee work, through stakeholder input, and then State Board of Education adoption. Okay, then that feeds into the district implementing, and they have 3 school years to implement those standards into their curriculum, instruction, and district assessment system. At the same time that 3 years of district implementation is happening, our state is developing the state items like you just saw here. So this takes 2 to 3 years to develop. So that first year is usually alignment to the standards and item development. The second year is looking at the field test data, making improvements. And then the third year is fully operationalizing it and using those results for student performance and for school performance ratings. And then that feeds into those assessment results being used for state and federal accountability, to evaluate local programs, and to produce our state report card. So your student's data now comes to you. What do you need to know with that? Well, first, in the right blue box, I just want to point out that the state gives the reports to the districts after they finish testing. And then those are delivered to the parents in the fall. So next year, you'll be able to get the results. In the next fall, you'll be able to get the results of your students' results from this past May testing. Those reports are just providing a performance snapshot for the state test. And so it is important to remember that that's one moment in time. It's one piece of data. The district and school data can help focus on short or long periods of time. So you may have in the schools and in the district assessment system, a quick test, a quick exam to see how kids are doing and to give the teachers some information about if students are understanding what they're learning and if they need to have some more instruction time on anything, or if they want to help identify any misconceptions in learning and understanding. And then they also have longer periods of time being assessed through unit exams and culminating projects that may be done. So assessment data does not only come from a paper, pencil, or computer type test. It's important to know, and aligned with what you were hearing from Dr. Mathern earlier, that as we're looking at the profile of a graduate, there's a lot of information that can come from how a student demonstrates their understanding through a performance task or through a project. And so assessment data can also come from teacher observation. It can come from, if they're in band and they have a end of the year concert, the teacher can evaluate how they did individually within the group on that concert. If a student's going to get up and do either build something and demonstrate it or model it or give explanation to their design, those are all things that can be assessed through rubrics that also give data points. And all of these data points give that holistic view. You bring it all together and it gives you that full picture of understanding on how well your student is learning the standards and mastering and demonstrating their mastery of that understanding. With that, school improvement is done through that data to help guide whatever curriculum adjustments and improvement efforts need to be made. And so those different data points are all brought together to make determinations at the teacher classroom level as well as at the school and district level. And so your teacher's probably looking at individual assessment data as well as state and district data to make classroom decisions. Your school principals are looking at that data across the school system to see how each of the classrooms are performing and if there's any pockets of concern or need to dive deeper in to understand what's happening in a certain area. And then your district is doing the same with looking at that data across the schools to see how that system is working at the bigger district level. So that bigger picture is, there's a lot of data points that feed into everything. And when you get your state summative results from the YTOP or YALT test, you can then take that, have a discussion with your teacher to say, how does this line up? How does this compare to what you're seeing my child do on a daily or regular, in their daily or regular work, to understand the full potential of how they're doing. And with that, you may have seen on our social media, this is Mrs. Sage, and she is our avatar for our state assessments. We have a couple of QR codes here where you can find out more information, but we have the top QR code to give you more information on YTOP, and then the bottom one on data. And I want to take a moment to go into our website and show you also where you can find information that I've discussed for standards and assessment so that you can understand where this information is additionally for yourself. So I'll give you a moment in case you want to grab those QR codes. And then I'm going to go into the state public site for WDE and show you where to find that information. And I'll put that back up after I go into this if you need that again. Okay, so our WDE website is edu.wyoming.gov. And when you go into the blue banner up at the top, let me zoom this in a bit for you. The second one over is transparency. And if you click that, you'll see a hub pop down and you'll see some options here for you. So that big picture system I was talking about today, accountability, assessment, standards, and accreditation, can all be found right here, as well as some of the other things I was touching on to the right with statewide system of support, district assessment, etc. So over here on the left, the two areas I mostly talked about was assessment and standards, and you can see that if you click on that, it will take you into that main page. So here's where the standards are. And I want to point out that on that first page, you'll be able to see all 10 content areas in one document for your student by grade level, especially in these elementary grades. That can be really relevant. It is there for all, but especially as you might be interested in what is your first grader learning, you can open that up and then you can see that all 10 content areas are here. So if you want to go see what the PE standards look like, you can just click that and that would take you over to where you can see that. To be familiar with what these standards designs look like, they all look similar. So I just want you to see that sometimes you'll see that it is an individual grade and sometimes you'll see it's a grade band. So in this case, these PE standards, this is grade band K through 2, and districts can decide what that looks like within that grade band. So they may have designated a set of standards for each of those grades within, or they may have broken it out where there's some repeating across grades, or they may have divvied out across the grades. So that is a local decision on how to implement those standards once they're approved. Next, you'll see there's usually a term or a phrase which gives you an idea of the domain of that standard. So under this PE, you have movement, fitness, and personal and social behavior domains. And then under each of those domains, you'll see a sentence that is the statement of what that set of standards entails. And then you'll see each of the individual standards underneath with very clear direction of what the student is expected to do. Demonstrate, identify, engage. Okay. If I go back to this main page here, as you look over in the gray band on the right-hand side, you'll see that there are also child pages under that parent page that we just opened. So you can click on content areas and you can go in and see each of those standards just by content area. So if you wanted to go in and see the newest computer science standards, you would go to the 2023 version. If you see like this where there's two sets, the reason is as one is being set up to implement in the district, remembering they have 3 years to do that, there is a period of time where one set is being closed out and a new set is being implemented and set up. And so we need to leave both available to the districts during that 3 years so they can transition in their own time as they designate as a local decision. But always the year will be on there to help you to see which is the most recent iteration. Also over on the side, you can see the standards review. So there's where you can go find more information about what standards are up for review and what the timeline of that review is. And additional information is usually followed underneath. And so if we are doing a call for committee, you'll be able to find that information here as well as put out through our media release. Okay, I'm going to go over to the assessment side for a second. If I go back into transparency and I go to assessment, that will take us to our state assessments. And so like you heard me say, here's your different assessments, Y-Top, Y-Alt, Access, which is the EL, English Learner Test, and ACT and Work Keys, which were the high school versions of college and career readiness. You can go in and you can find out more about any of those individually, but on this main page, you get an overview of state assessments. So there's some information about the most recent results. There's a parent and community member overview from last year's results. As you can see here, those results. Over time, our students are showing improvement and recovery post-pandemic. We had a little tiny dip in that year where we had some learning loss demonstrated, but then we are climbing back out of that. There's additional information on this page of how to understand your results. And anytime you see these gold banners, those are a tab to take you into another document for more information. And then how those cut scores, what that looks like for your students' results also are here if you're interested in learning more about what that looks like. But what comes in your student report really gives you more information about what that means, and you don't have to interpret that yourself. Okay, if I go into Y-Top, there you can see Mrs. Sage, and there's a little spotlight about Y-Top where you can go get more information about our assessments. And there's where you can also see those QR codes that were provided there for you. And then there's some information about why we give the assessment and what it measures. You can see the blueprints, which designate what we're assessing. If I open that up, you'll see it matches up to those state standards, and it tells you what weighting each of those domains is going to be on the state test. But in particular, you can go and see my third grader is going to be assessed on these standards on that state test. So your teachers and schools have this information. They know what they're aiming for, and then you also have it accessible on the main site for you as well. Okay, and I think with that, I am done with my presentation part, so I will go ahead and put that last slide back up and then see if there are any questions for me to answer.
Thank you so much for an amazing presentation and sharing all of your insights. Will you just watch the chat or would you like me to facilitate that? Are you good, Edmund?
Let's see, I went to 1025 stamp. Let me see if I can catch up here. Okay, I hear that we are in the top of ratings, but there was some legislation this past session about needing more reading support. I think this is referring to the NAEP test. I also see scores less than half are proficient sometimes, 37%, locally, not as a state. How can less than half proficient be one of the top in the country? I've seen this personally for my kids that aren't up to standards with reading. Okay, so yeah, this is something I want to clarify and make sure we have full understanding. So when you do see the state data, let me go back to that on our website for a second. When you saw like this with the about 50 to 56% proficiency rate, there is a misunderstanding that that means that that's only 50% of kids are able to read, or that there's anything about there being a set cut at 50%, and that is not correct. So first, on the reading part, the ELA test is more than a reading test. Our English language arts test is fully assessing all domains of communication. So can a student read and understand and demonstrate comprehension? And can they write? Are they able to do speaking and listening skills? So those are all collectively what we're assessing there. And so since our test is not comparing students against each other, it's comparing how a student is performing on the standards, measuring what their understanding of those standards are. Each student has the ability to, truly hit whatever mark of proficiency they are at. And so you might see that as a state average, this 56% of students were proficient, but there are students that are taking home proficiency in the 80s, 90s, and really demonstrating very well. And so this average across all of our students is averaging out, and it just so happens that over time you're seeing this averaging out around that 50% line, somewhere close to it. With our NAEP results, we've heard the superintendent say, yeah, we're doing great compared to other states, but it doesn't mean we want to stop there. We want to keep working and improving and doing better. And so there's a lot of efforts going on right now to work with schools and to provide additional resources and supports, and having better understanding about how to use that data and to make determinations and make changes that can impact those results in a positive way, so that we ensure that student learning is our main focus and what we're seeing as a result of it. So we're still working on those efforts, and we're hoping that we're really going to start to see that in the next couple of years with our data as that comes back. Okay, the next question is questions about time spent on assessment. My daughter is in kindergarten, and there are 21 kids in her class. Her teacher is required by the district to assess all 21 kids on 8 assessment topics, 3 times per topic over the course of the year. My understanding is the state requires assessment on 2 topics. It appears there are no support structures in place to ensure that time spent on assessment does not take away from time spent on teaching, learning. What can we do at a district level to advocate for support for teachers? Okay, so a couple of things. So when I was talking about the time spent on assessment, that 1% is focused on the state test. So the state test cannot take more than 1% of learning time. Your district and your classroom assessments are part of a system that feeds into monitoring learning throughout. So that's not incorporated in that 1%. So, for all of time, teachers have used assessments and observations to determine if students are learning. And those different assessments, like I said earlier, don't have to be just paper pencil or just computer tests. There's a variety of means to be able to evaluate students' understanding. So that is a crucial piece of teaching and learning, and making sure that there is the assessment that is given at the teacher level is making sure that they can identify if students are on track. They can identify misconceptions and stop them before they continue to learn incorrectly, and to kind of gauge how students are doing as a whole on that topic. To the latter part of your question here, there are 3 assessed areas in our state assessment. So let me go back over here. We have, pardon me, there we go. We have English language arts, math, and science that are assessed on our state tests. But your district assessment system is required to assess all state standards. So all areas that kids are learning have to have assessments in place, again, to help teachers understand, are students learning properly? Are they needing additional supports to assist in their learning? And then schools and districts are also using that information to make determinations on the curricular level. Is what we're using for our learning and instruction producing what we're expecting, and is it delivering the results we want? Okay, next question. Questions about time spent on assessment. My daughter is in kindergarten and there are 21 kids in her class. Oh, maybe that's a repeat. Yep, looks like that went in twice. Let me go on to the next one. Okay, we are doing questions. Oh,
Yep.
sounds like that was just a response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, let's see. We will give them a couple more seconds to see if there's any more questions, and then we'll let Miss Laurie go.
And if there's anything that you just want further clarification or want me to go revisit so that you connect the dots, please don't hesitate. I'm happy to go back to any of the slides. I know it's a lot of information and I know it's a lot to take in, but I think the main thing to take away too is, it's a system. It's a full system that feeds into each other. It's very directed to produce a full understanding of that system and making sure our educational program is of high quality, is rigorous, so that the expectations of student learning do build our students to be best equipped to go out into the world post-secondary. Once they graduate, once they go off that stage and they go out into the world, it is expected that they are able to be productive citizens, that they're able to contribute to their community, and through that they've built the skills to be globally and economically competitive members of society as well. And that's all written into our statute as well. So our legislators really did have high hopes for our kids, and our schools and our districts and our Department of Education are doing everything we can to provide those opportunities for students. The state board has put in place the profile of the graduate to really ensure we are staying up with changes that are happening and with what the business and industry is saying they need those students to be able to do when they come out of the classroom, or even while they're still in high school, they're starting to have those opportunities. And so it is an exciting time for education. It's also a scary time as things are changing, and we're trying to make sure that the data that we pull together gives us a good snapshot picture of what's working and where additional supports are needed.
Thank you so much, Laurie, for taking your time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you to the audience for your questions and interest. And please stay tuned. In about 10 minutes, we have another great session at 11 o'clock. And with that, we will just take a short break. Thank you again, Laurie.
Thank you.